To expedite an orderly and safe flow of IFR departures at busy terminal areas, Instrument Departure Procedures, or DPs, were created. These procedures and charts simplify departure for you and controllers, provide a transition between the airport and en route structure, as well as reduce frequency congestion. For example, prior to DPs, a clearance might have sounded like this.
Cessna 385 X-Ray Yankee cleared to the Salt Lake City Airport as filed. Maintain 17,000. Maintain runway heading until reaching 9,000. Turn left heading 250. Intercept the 268-degree radial of Denver Vortac. Cross super intersection at or above 13,300. Denver departure will be 123.85. Squawk 1425.
Imagine the time it would take and the problems it could cause to repeat this type of clearance for every aircraft taking off at places like JFK in New York, O'Hare in Chicago, Los Angeles International, or Denver International Airport. DPs help alleviate this communications congestion by consolidating several individual procedures into one standard procedure. This is what the clearance might sound like if you received it with an instrument departure procedure.
Cessna 385 X-Ray Yankee cleared to the Salt Lake City Airport. Denver 3 departure then as filed. Maintain 17,000. Squawk 1425.
Notice that Denver 3 departure replaced several procedures in the previous clearance. This not only saves communication time, but makes it less likely you'll receive a clearance you don't understand. Clearances for instrument departure procedures are issued at the option of ATC. If you don't have the graphic or textual information for the DP with you, you should not accept the clearance. If you don't want to use a DP, you should indicate no DP in the remarks section of your flight plan. All instrument departure procedures provide you with obstacle clearance. DPs can be either textual or graphic. Textual procedures, referred to as IFR departure procedures outside the U.S., exist only for obstacle clearance and can normally be found at the bottom of Jeppesen Airport charts. If ATC does not assign a graphic DP or other instructions, you can use the textual DP for obstacle clearance to depart the airport and, in some cases, to transition to the en route structure. The FAA is converting some complex textual departure procedures into graphic procedures to improve situational awareness. Graphic procedures are published as separate charts and can be filed as part of a flight plan. When a graphic departure procedure is created only for obstacle clearance, it is labeled obstacle and may contain the statement, if not assigned a departure procedure by ATC, this procedure may be flown to provide obstacle clearance. ATC departure procedures, referred to as SIDs outside the U.S., do not have the obstacle label. These procedures also provide obstacle clearance, but are established primarily to simplify pilot-controller communications, expedite the flow of traffic, and to help with noise abatement. Due to the dynamic nature of instrument procedures and charts, you may see more changes to DPs in the future. Now let's take a look at a few typical DPs and see how they are constructed and what each part means to you. For ease of access, Jeppesen files DPs with all the other charts serving the terminal area. The chart date, index number, and in some cases the effective date are listed at the top of the chart. Notice that the 10-3 type chart index numbers indicate DPs. A departure procedure is often named after the last fix for the common portion of the procedure prior to the departure transitions. In this case, Merrick intersection. This particular procedure is called the Merrick 3 departure. When a significant change in the procedure occurs, the name changes to the next higher number. At the next major revision, this DP will be renamed the Merrick 4 departure. Obstacle graphic or ATC DPs are one of two types, either pilot nav or vector. The most common graphical depiction is the pilot nav DP, where you, as the pilot, have the primary responsibility for navigation. And the other is the vector DP, where a controller vectors or directs you to fly a certain heading in order to intercept a fix or radial along the flight path. Since this is a pilot nav DP, it is noted near the name of the procedure. The name of this chart is the Merrick 3 departure, which serves the Meadows Airport at Bakersfield, California. As was mentioned earlier, a DP provides an obstacle-free flight path. This is based, however, on your aircraft climbing at 200 feet per nautical mile after it crosses the end of the runway, at least 35 feet above the ground. A slope of 152 feet per nautical mile is assessed for any obstacles. If none penetrate this slope, the 200 foot per mile climb gradient gives you a minimum of 48 feet of obstacle clearance for each mile of flight. When an obstacle, such as rising terrain, penetrates this gradient, obstacle avoidance procedures must be specified in either a textual or graphic format. One of these procedures is to incorporate a climb gradient greater than 200 feet per nautical mile. If you filed and expect to be assigned the Gorman transition, the minimum climb gradient is 220 feet per nautical mile to 9,500 feet. Note that the climb gradient is in feet per nautical mile. Since your VSI only measures feet per minute, you must convert the climb gradient into something which is easily measured. Jeppesen provides this information in a convenient table for various ground speeds. For example, if your ground speed is 100 knots, you must maintain a climb rate of at least 367 feet per minute. Pilot nav DPs usually consist of departure routes identified by bold lines and transition routes identified by dashed lines. The departure routes all terminate at a fix, in this case, the Merrick intersection, where the transition routes begin. A transition route name usually corresponds to the name of the fix where the transition route ends. For example, the Gorman transition terminates at the Gorman Vortac. When DP charts cover large geographical areas, they may not be drawn to scale. This means distances cannot be accurately measured with a plotter. On some DPs, the distance from the airport or runway to the DP fix will be given, such as direct distance from Meadows Airport to Merrick intersection, 16 nautical miles. This value is included to help you determine the approximate mileage for flight planning purposes. However, actual track mileages are depicted along the transition routes. When filing an IFR flight plan that incorporates a DP, you should use the computer departure code, including the departure name and, if appropriate, transition name. For example, if you're using the Merrick 3 departure to Merrick intersection and then proceeding en route from there, the code MARIC3.MARIC should be used on the flight plan. If the flight is composed of a departure and transition route, such as the Gorman transition, the code MARIC3.GMN should be used. By using the computer codes, you not only help the flight service station specialist, but you also help yourself. Since the computer codes won't have to be looked up, the specialist spends less time entering the flight plan into the computer. This should enable you to receive your clearance in a minimal amount of time. You must carefully review any departure procedure, required performance and equipment criteria. Some high-performance procedures are depicted here. The other type of instrument departure procedure is the vector DP. An example of this type of DP is the Denver 3 departure. Notice that this DP does not contain any departure or transition routes. Instead, the controller provides vectors to any one of several fixes. When filing a vector DP, a depicted termination fix where the filed or assigned en route structure begins should be in your flight plan. This type of departure can be used by various types of aircraft. Vector DPs require two-way radio communication, and the lost communications procedures detailed in the FARs apply unless lost comm procedures are published for the departure. In the case of the Denver 3 departure, if communication is lost, you must comply with the procedure titled Lost Communications Procedure Only. Let's take a brief look at the relationship between a graphic DP and a textual DP. Notice the high initial minimum en route altitudes in this graphic departure procedure. Now let's look at the associated textual departure procedure. Note the altitude requirement for aircraft departing westbound from Denver between the 234 and 312 degree radials to ensure obstacle clearance. If you're flying this textual DP for your initial departure, you must climb in the Denver VOR holding pattern until at or above 11,500 feet before proceeding westbound. Pilot nav and vector DPs have a number of advantages for IFR departures, including reduced workload for both pilots and controllers. Remember, all DPs make your climb out safer by providing an obstruction-clear flight path when you depart the airport. In the case of pilot nav DPs, vector DPs, and some textual DPs, this extends to your transition to the en route structure. The departure procedure you use during an IFR flight varies from airport to airport. Sometimes it may be as simple as a climbing turn to your intended course. At other times, it may involve a complicated set of courses, altitudes, and vectors. Therefore, before making an IFR departure, you should acquaint yourself with the procedures which are available at your airport. By regulation, before any IFR flight, you must check the en route weather and the weather at your destination and departure airports. For commercial flights operating under Part 121, 125, or 135 of the Federal Aviation Regulations, certain visibility requirements must be met before a takeoff is allowed. While these minimums are not required for flights conducted under Part 91, they are good guidelines for you to follow. For aircraft with 1 or 2 engines, the standard visibility minimums for takeoff are 1 statute mile. Because some airports have obstructions such as rising terrain, a minimum ceiling, as well as an increase in the visibility, may be required. If the minimums are higher than standard, they will be noted on the airport chart. For example, at Daytona Beach, the takeoff minimums for runways 7 right, 16, 25 left, and 34 are a 300-foot ceiling and 1 mile visibility. Since the takeoff minimums are normally based on visibility, let's look at the various types which are reported at an airport. Prevailing or tower visibility is the greatest distance a weather observer or tower controller can see throughout at least 1/2 the horizon circle. It is measured in statute miles or fractions of miles. Runway visibility value, or RVV, is the distance down the runway that you can see unlighted objects or lights of moderate intensity. This value is generally derived from an electronic measuring device and is listed in miles or fractions of miles. When available, RVV is used instead of prevailing or tower visibility. The most accurate reading of visibility along a specific runway is the RVR, or runway visual range. This value is based on measurements from transmissometers located near the runway and relates the horizontal visibility in hundreds of feet. An RVR value of 12 means that the visibility is 1,200 feet. Since the visibility may vary from one runway to another and at different portions on the same runway, especially at larger airports, the RVR value should be used only for the specified runway. Once you have determined that the weather will allow you to make a takeoff, you need to consider what type of departure procedure you're likely to use. When departing an airport, you must climb at a rate of at least 200 feet per nautical mile. This allows at least 48 feet of obstacle clearance for every nautical mile you travel. If obstacle clearance requirements are not met, a textual or graphic departure procedure will be published. These departures are designed according to the criteria established in the United States Standard for Terminal Instrument Procedures, abbreviated TIRPS. Jeppesen prints the obstacle textual departure procedures with the takeoff minimums on the airport charts. Departures from airports near large metropolitan areas are usually conducted under radar coverage. A series of heading assignments, called vectors, are provided to transition you from takeoff to the en route portion of your flight. In these cases, the tower generally gives you an initial heading to fly. A short time after liftoff, the tower will instruct you to contact departure control. After changing to the departure frequency, your initial call should include your ID, current altitude, and the altitude to which you're climbing.
Departure Cessna 52241, 2,500, climbing to 5,000.
By stating your current altitude, the controller can verify the accuracy of your Mode C transponder.
Cessna 241, roger, radar contact.
Radar contact is used by the controller to let you know that your aircraft has been identified. However, it is your responsibility to maintain adequate obstacle clearance until the controller issues you a vector or other instructions. Departure control will then give you specific headings to fly in order to intercept your clearance route. Once the final vector has been given, the controller will tell you to resume own navigation. This phrase means that the controller now expects you to navigate using your own equipment. It does not mean that your flight is no longer in radar contact. When departing an airport without an operating control tower, some additional procedures may apply. For example, you might use a ground communications outlet. You may be issued a clearance void time. ATC uses this procedure to reserve airspace around the airport. If you do not depart before this time, your clearance will be canceled. When climbing to your assigned altitude, ATC expects you to climb at the optimum rate for your aircraft until you're within 1,000 feet of your target altitude. Then slow your rate to 500 to 1,500 feet per minute until you begin to level off. If you cannot maintain at least 500 feet per minute throughout the climb, you must notify ATC of your actual rate. In addition to providing obstacle clearance, at busier airports, instrument departure procedures, or DPs, expedite the flow of air traffic by reducing the length and complexity of issued clearances and by cutting down on pilot-controller communications. As with any IFR departure, DPs also assure adequate obstacle clearance. Some instrument departure procedures contain specific performance requirements in order to maintain adequate obstacle clearance. You should always review the graphic instrument DP chart you're planning to use to verify that your aircraft can comply with the required performance criteria. If you cannot meet these requirements, you should request no DP on your flight plan. A graphic instrument departure procedure requires you to fly a specific route and altitude combination after takeoff. For example, let's take a look at the Gorman transition of the Merrick 3 departure at Bakersfield, California. To fly this pilot nav departure procedure, first look at the takeoff information for the runway in use. In this case, as soon as you take off from runway 12 left, you're required to make a right turn to a heading of 240. From there, the procedure calls for you to intercept the 196-degree radial of the Shafter Vortac and proceed to Merrick intersection. To reach Gorman, fly the 109-degree radial of the Avenel Vortac until you intercept the 328-degree radial of the Gorman VOR. Then fly direct to Gorman VOR. From this point, proceed according to your flight-planned route, unless otherwise instructed. Notice that Ninty intersection has a minimum crossing altitude of 8,800 feet for the Gorman transition. If you were using the Lake Hughes transition, the minimum crossing altitude for Ninty would be 6,000 feet. These altitudes are necessary to achieve the minimum altitudes along the transition routes. As you have seen, an instrument departure procedure can take many forms and is frequently changed. Because of this, it's important that you understand the procedure and its requirements on you and your aircraft before you take off. As an instrument-rated pilot, you will have easier access to large airports you might not venture into under visual flight rules. These busy airports require procedures for sequencing aircraft to an instrument approach. Arrival charts provide a smooth transition from the en route structure to busy terminal areas. They simplify arrival procedure instructions and let you and the controllers know what to expect. Standard terminal arrival routes, or STARs, use similar charting conventions as departure procedures. Unlike departure procedures, which help you navigate from an airport to the en route structure, STARs take you from the en route structure down to the vicinity of an airport. They terminate at a fix or nav aid from which you can begin an instrument approach procedure, or at a position where ATC can vector you for an approach. STARs normally contain both a textual description of all transitions plus the arrival route, and a graphic depiction of the procedure that follows normal conventions for terminal charts. STARs are usually filed in front of the primary airport for a specific city. On other airports that use the same STARs, a note on the airport chart refers you to the primary airport under which the STAR is filed. However, in many cases, additional copies of the STAR are filed in front of other major airports it serves, with minor modifications to emphasize the procedures for that specific airport. Let's look at the Lemig 1 arrival for San Antonio, Texas. This arrival, like most STARs, consists of multiple transition routes and an arrival route. This particular arrival utilizes radar vectors to the final approach course. You can distinguish the arrival route from the transitions by the solid route line. You will also notice that the STAR is named for the fix at which the arrival route begins. In addition to San Antonio International Airport, the Lemig 1 arrival also serves Stinson Municipal Airport. Notice that the chart provides the direct distance from LK intersection, where radar vectors begin, to the airport served. Kelly Air Force Base and Randolph Air Force Base are served by other versions of this STAR that are included in military subscriptions. The Lemig 1 arrival also contains information that will help jet pilots plan their descents. The vertical navigation planning section on some STARs may contain several altitude step-down fixes. Because of the large geographic area covered by standard terminal arrival routes, many of these charts are not drawn to scale. When you file for a star on your flight plan, use an appropriate code just as you do for a departure procedure. For example, the code for the Corpus Christi transition of the Lemig 1 arrival would be CRP.LEMIG1. Notice that the transition portion of the code is listed first for a star, but last on a departure procedure. Whenever a major revision occurs to a star, the number is changed. The next revision for this star will be the Lemig 2 arrival. Standard terminal arrival routes expedite your descent from the en route structure and position your aircraft at a point where you can begin an approach. Unless you indicate no star on your flight plan, ATC can assign one anytime they need to. Being familiar with these procedures will enable you to fly IFR into the most congested airspace with confidence. As traffic around an airport becomes more congested, procedures for sequencing aircraft to an instrument approach become necessary. One of the easiest ways for ATC to ensure an orderly flow of traffic is to assign an inbound aircraft a standard terminal arrival route, or STAR. It is important to follow arrival procedures carefully. With that in mind, let's look at a STAR for a flight into Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. As you're approaching Blythe VOR at 12,000 feet, Los Angeles Center issues the following clearance.
Cessna 241, cleared to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport via the Blythe 2 arrival. Maintain 12000, contact Phoenix approach at Salome on 120.7.
ATC can assign you a star even though you have not requested the procedure, unless you have indicated no star on your flight plan. If you accept the clearance, you must have the charted procedure or at least an approved textual description of the star. Let's review the Blythe 2 arrival. This star begins at the Blythe VOR. From there, you'll follow the 082-degree radial to Salome intersection. Then you'll proceed inbound on the 285-degree radial of the Gila Bend VOR to Saddle intersection. When you reach Saddle intersection, you'll turn east and proceed inbound on the 256-degree radial of the Willie VOR. From over Arlen, you can expect radar vectors to the final approach course if runway 8 is in use. If runway 26 is being used, you should expect radar vectors prior to reaching Tukey intersection. Now that you've reviewed the arrival procedure and set the radios and navigation equipment, you can begin to plan for the approach. Tune in and listen to the ATIS broadcast to get the current weather and information about the approaches in use and the landing runways.
Wind 070 at 8, altimeter 299er2. ILS runway 8 right approach in use, landing runway 8 right. Advise Phoenix Approach Control you have information Romeo.
With this information, you can now review the specific approach chart and determine the frequencies, inbound course, descent and landing minimums, missed approach point, and the missed approach procedure. It's important to review these early in the arrival to reduce your workload later. Just before you reach Hyder intersection, Phoenix Approach issues the following clearance.
Cessna 241, cross Paint intersection at 10,000.
This clearance authorizes you to begin the descent to 10,000 feet at your discretion, as long as you are at 10,000 feet when you pass Paint intersection. To comply with the crossing restriction, you must determine when to start the descent. Since your present altitude is 12,000, you'll need to lose 2,000 feet. Assuming a 500 foot per minute rate of descent, it will take 4 minutes to reach 10,000 feet. A 4-minute descent at a ground speed of 120 knots will cover 8 nautical miles. The distance from Hyder intersection to Paint intersection is 11 nautical miles. Therefore, if you begin your descent after you pass Hyder, you should be at 10,000 feet, approximately 3 miles before Paint. From Paint, it's another 8 nautical miles to Arlen, where you can expect radar vectors off the arrival to begin your approach. A descend via clearance simply instructs you to follow the altitudes published on the star. If you were instructed to descend via the Blythe 2 arrival, you would be expected to stay above the MEAs published on this chart. If ATC amends your route or altitude to something different than what is published on the star, it effectively cancels the procedure and places you on radar vectors. Arrival procedures make the transition from en route to approach an easy and orderly procedure for both you and ATC.